Hello students, continuing with the last part of Unit 3, Sources of Financing and Cost of Capital. So today we will be seeing Weighted Average Cost of Capital and Marginal Cost of Capital. I have named it as Module 3.2E. So till now we have seen what are the different sources of financing, what are the basic concepts of cost of capital, how do we calculate the cost of capital individually in case of the venture capital, preferential capital, term loans, equity capital and retained earnings. So today we are coming and dealing with the last part, that is determination of weighted average cost of capital, marginal cost of capital, and also we will be seeing problems which comes as case study, which is particularly asked from this unit on the concept of weighted average cost of capital. So I have named all these three as module 3.2E. Moving ahead. What is the meaning of weighted average cost of capital? So weighted average cost of capital is nothing but the total cost associated with raising the total finance of the company. It is also called as composite cost or weighted average cost of capital. That is a short form. It is used to find out the cost of total or combined source of finance. It is the cost of capital for all the sources of finance put together. So example, if a finance is raised by a company through equity, preference, term loans, therefore what is the total cost incurred to raise the finance through all these sources? So students, till now we have seen how to calculate the cost of capital for individual source of finance which is raised by the company. Now, calculating the total cost, which is nothing but all the individual costs put together, taking the average of it, we get the total cost. So what is the total cost that is incurred or that will be associated with raising the total finance of the company is nothing but weighted average cost of capital, since we take the average based on the weights of each individual cost of capital relating to the finance raised by the company. So it is weighted average cost of capital. Moving ahead. Important points to be considered while calculating weighted average cost of capital. Cost of capital, this is weighted average cost of capital, is denoted by KO, where K stands for cost of capital and O stands for overall cost of capital. So cost of WACC, just will change this to cost of weighted average cost of capital is denoted by KO, where K stands for cost and O stands for overall cost of capital. Now, other thing that needs to be considered here is the system of weights in weighted average cost of capital. As in the name itself, we see it is weighted average cost of capital. So there are some weights assigned. So there are two types of weights that are assigned, or there are two types of weight to the various sources of funds which may be carried out, that is historical or existing weights and marginal weights. So whenever we are solving problems relating to weighted average cost of capital, there can be two types of weights on the basis of which we can solve the sum. First one is historical or existing weights and second is marginal weights. Now what are these weights? What is historical or existing weights? Weights are assigned to individual sources of funds in the ratio of their share in the total capital. So under this method, whatever is the amount of each individual fund and what is the ratio of each individual fund to the total capital, based on that weights will be assigned, And there are two ways of assigning weights under this method. So under historical method or historical weights, there are two ways in which you can assign the weights: book value weights and market value weights. Now marginal weights are nothing but weights are assigned based on additional and incremental funds raised. See, when is marginal weights to be used? Whenever company is having an existing capital structure, means if the company has already raised the funds through different sources of capital, but in the future it is planning for a new investment or a new proposal, and for that it requires additional funds. Now, what is the cost of additional funds? Okay, that additional or incremental funds, in order to calculate cost of that, we need to assign weights based on marginal weights. So what are marginal weights? Weights are assigned based on the additional and incremental funds raised and not on the existing capital structure. Okay, so in this slide we have seen that weighted average cost of capital is noted by KO, where K stands for cost and O stands for overall cost of capital. Since it is weighted average cost of capital, the weights can be assigned in two ways: either historical or existing weights, that is for a capital structure that is already there or already raised by the company, and marginal weights, that is the additional funds that the company is going to raise. So in historical weights, how are you going to assign the weights? Based on the proportion that an individual source has in the total capital. And under historical or existing weights, there are two methods, that is book value weights and market value weights. Depending upon the type of weight to be used in the exam, you have to use the respective weight. Suppose in the exam they ask calculate the WACC under book value weights, then you need to use assigning the book values. And if it is given to find out the WACC using market value weights, then you need to find out and you need to assign the weights based on the market values. Moving ahead, historical weight method, that is the first one. We are going to see the first one. Now we know that historical weight method is that each individual source of funds is given a weight based on the proportion or the amount that the each individual source has towards the total capital. So there are two ways under historical weight method, that is book value weights and market value weights. Now what are book value weights? They are assigned on the basis of book value of a specific source of funds shown in the balance sheet of the company. So under book value weights, the weights are assigned based on the book value of each source of fund which will be available in the balance sheet of the company. So for example, a particular company, say XYZ company, has these following sources of capital, and the amount of equity shares in their books is 20 lakhs. 10% is preference shares. 10% preference shares is having an amount in the books as 10 lakhs. 12% debentures is having the amount in the books as 13 lakhs. So total is coming up to 43 lakhs. Now I already told you under historical weight method, how are the weights assigned? Weights are assigned on the basis of the amount of each individual source in the proportion to their total capital of the company. So in this example, what is the total capital of the company? 43,000. Now if we want to assign weight to each individual source, so if you want to assign the weights to equity shares, how did we derive at this 0.47? It is 20 lakhs divided by 43 lakhs, you get 0.47. That means the weightage of equity shares in the total capital raised by the company is 0.47, the weightage. Now in case of preference shares, what is the weight of preference shares in the total capital of the company? It is 10 lakh divided by 43 lakhs, that is coming up to 0.23. And 12% debentures, what is the weight of debentures in the total capital of the company? It is 13 lakhs divided by 43 lakhs, that is 0.30. So always the weight should come up to 1. So as we have already seen, see, weights are assigned to individual source of funds in the ratio of their share in total capital. That is what we have seen here. What is the share of individual equity share to the total capital? That is the weight that will be assigned to equity. What is the weight of preference shares will be depending upon what is the amount of preference shares and the total capital. Similarly for debentures. So what is basically book value weights? So book value weights are nothing but the weights are calculated based on the book value of the sources of funds. Book value means the value that is appearing in the books of the company. Moving ahead to market value weights. They are assigned on the basis of market value of specific source of fund. So what is the market value of equity shares in the, what is the value of the company's equity shares in the market? So if it is 22 lakhs, what is the value of preference shares in the market for a respective company? 12 lakhs, debentures 15 lakhs. So how will you then assign the market value weights? So based on the market value. So it will be 22 lakhs divided by 49 lakhs. So it is 0.45. 12 lakhs divided by 49 lakhs. It is 0.244 preference shares. 15 lakhs divided by 49 lakhs. So it is 0.31 for debentures. So very important thing that needs to be considered while calculating market value weights is under this method retained earnings to be ignored. Why under this method we are ignoring retained earnings? Retained earnings are earnings that is kept aside by a particular company out of its profits. Such profits which is not distributed as dividend to equity shareholders. Now it is a type of savings. Now will our saving have some market value? No, right? That is why retained earnings is to be ignored. These were just examples to show you how the weights are derived. So in case of book value weights, the weights are based on the or calculated basis the book value of the individual source of finance. In case of market value weights, you will calculate the weights based on the market value of each source of capital or each source of fund and not the book value. In the exam, they will specify whether you have to calculate book value weights or market value weights. Based on what weight you have to do the calculations. And if nothing is specified, go in for book value weights. So these two weights are coming under historical weight method. Moving ahead. Now how do you determine WACC? That is weighted average cost of capital. We saw how to determine the weights. We know how to determine the cost of capital for each individual source. Let us see how to find out the average. The weighted average cost of different sources is known as weighted average cost of capital. Now each different source of capital, if we take the average of it based on the weights, we get weighted average cost of capital. Now what is the formula to calculate KO? As you all know that weighted average cost of capital is denoted by KO. What is the formula? First you take KE. Now what is KE? Cost of equity capital into W1. So W1 is the weight that is assigned for equity. Then K plus, you're going to add KP. KP is cost of preference shares into W2. So that the weights that are assigned to preference shares. Then plus cost of debentures into W3, which is nothing but weight assigned to debentures, and so on. You can say take plus KL into W4. KL is nothing but cost of term loans into W4 is nothing but weight that are assigned to term loans. So on, depending upon the number of sources of funds that the company has raised. Or you can use a tabular table. We will just see what is the format of this table. Both will derive at the same answer. So first the sources of capital we'll just write down. These two columns will be same as provided in the problem. So sources of capital is equity shares, preference shares, debentures. This is just an example. They can be retained earnings, they can be term loans. Okay. Next, In example, I've just taken 3. Amount is 20 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 13 lakhs. So total is 43 lakhs. Either book value weights or market value weights. The method to calculate weights is the same. For book value, you need to consider these amounts based on the balance sheet amounts, and for market value weights, you need to consider these amounts based on the amounts that each source is having in the market. So, how do you calculate book value weights and market value weights? It is calculated as 20 lakh divided by 43 lakh, which is nothing but 0.47. 10 lakh divided by 43 lakh, which is 0.23. 13 lakhs divided by 43 lakh, which is 0.30. So total has to come up to 1. So is this clear? The first 3 tables will be, first column will always show the sources of capital. Second column will be showing the amounts based on the weights that are assigned, that are asked in the problem. If they are asking book value weights, then show all the amounts based on the book values. If they are asking market value weights, shows all the amount based on the market value. Then calculate the weights, either book value or market value weights. That is column number 3. Next is you need to know the cost, after tax cost for each of the source. So KE, either the cost will be given in the problem or you need to calculate the cost for each individual source of finance. So which we have already seen in our previous video lectures how to calculate that. So after tax cost for equity shares, for example, is 5%, preference shares is 10% and debentures is 12%. Column number 4, you know it will be always depicted as percentage. So I have directly written above percentage symbol. So I have not written individually here 5%, 10% and 12%. Now, how do you calculate WACC? WACC, as you have already seen, see here in the formula, which is nothing but cost into the weight. So simple, what we will do is column number 3 into column number 4 will give you the WACC. So 0.47 into 5 will give you 2.35% as this is in percentage. That is why I have written your symbol already percentage, no need to individually write again. Then 0.23 into 10 is 2.3%, 0.30 into 12 is 3.6%. Now, WACC is nothing but the total cost for the total finance raised by the company. So we are taking the total cost, the total finance, 43 lakhs raised by the company. What is going to be the total cost for these 43 lakhs? So just add up these three, 2.35 plus 2.3 plus 3.6, which comes up to 8.25%. So therefore, the weighted average cost of capital is 8.25%. Quickly, we'll just revise this because this is very important. It can also come as case study. A problem on WACC can come for the case study, so it's very important. Always remember, whenever you're calculating WACC, that is weighted average cost of capital, you can solve it in a tabular format, which is very good for presentation also and good for easy to understand also. So totally prepare 5 columns, where first column you will just show all the sources of capital. Column number 2 you will write the amount. These amounts will be based on the method or the weights that they are asked in the problem. If they are telling solve back using book value weights, then please write the book values of the respective source of finance in this column. If they are telling you to solve by market value weights, then please write the market values for each individual source of finance. Then the third column will be assigning weights to each source of finance. Now, how do you assign weights? We have seen in historical weight method. How do we assign weights? What is the proportion of each individual source to the total capital of the company? So total capital is 43 lakhs. So what is the weightage of equity shares in the total capital? So how do we calculate that? 20 lakh divided by 43 lakh. You get 0.47. 10 lakh divided by 43 lakh, 0.23. 13 lakh divided by 43 lakh, 0.30. The total of all this should always be 1. Now, after tax cost is we have already seen in our previous video lectures. So you have to write the cost of each source of finance individually. Here you can write percentage, so that therefore no need to again write individually percentage symbol for each. And how do you calculate the weighted cost? It is nothing but column number 3 into column number 4. So weights into the cost, weights into the cost, weights into the cost, and the total of all this individual weights, the total of all this will give you the weighted average cost of capital, which is also to be noted in the terms of percentage. Moving ahead. Now coming to marginal cost of capital, which is also called as weighted marginal cost of capital. Now what is meaning of marginal cost? The marginal cost of funds is the cost of the next increments of the capital raised by the firm. As I already told you, marginal is the additional funds raised by the company or a firm. So the incremental funds raised by the company. That time what comes into picture? Marginal cost of capital. The cost of additional individual components of finance like shares, debentures, term loans, etc. should be ascertained to determine the weighted marginal cost of capital. So suppose if the firm wants to raise additional funds, for some maybe they're planning for a new investment or new proposal and they want to raise additional funds, maybe through shares, debentures or term loans. So what is only the additional cost incurred to raise the shares, debentures, term loans in totality will give you the weighted marginal cost of capital. Now determination of weighted marginal cost of capital. See, as I told you that for new investments, the company may require additional funds. So we can see that it can be divided into three parts. For new investments, obviously the additional funds is required for new investments or new proposals. External financing not required. See, there are two types of financing. One is external, that is by the issue of shares, preference shares, debentures, term loans, and one is internal, that is retained earnings. So suppose that the company, I'm just explaining the first case. Suppose that the company is having sufficient earnings, sufficient savings, which is also called as retained earnings. Will it want additional funds to be procured from an external source? No. So, in this first case, for new investments, external financing not required. That means it has sufficient retained earnings. Now, what is going to be the weighted average cost of capital in this case? We know that the cost of retained earnings is equal to the cost of equity. So, in the first case, if a firm is having sufficient retained earnings, which is required by the new proposal, that can be used by the new proposal, and then the firm may not raise any external finance, then in such situations what is going to be the weighted marginal cost of capital is nothing but it will be equal to the specific cost of capital of retained earnings, which you already know that KR is equals to K. Now, next is for new investments, external financing with same cost of capital and same proportion as existing. See, company is having an existing capital structure. Later, it plans for a new investment or a new proposal. So, it is raising the finance in the same proportion as the old. So, if a firm is raising the new capital funds in the same proportion as at the present and at the same specific cost of capital as at the present, then what is going to be the weighted marginal cost of capital? It is going to be same like weighted average cost of capital, because there is same proportion, there is same weights, there is same amount, there is same cost. That's the reason uh, that the weighted marginal cost of capital will be equal to the weighted average cost of capital. Next, for new investments, that is external financing with different cost of capital and change proportion as existing. Suppose if a company wants to raise funds, okay, and it wants to raise funds which is very different from the existing capital structure. So it is very quite possible that each cost of capital of different sources may be affected by an amount of funds raised and the proportion of particular source may also change as a result of new funds. Existing funds is different, their cost is different, and new additional raised also may be different. So these are the three cases under which you can determine the weighted average cost of capital depending upon the information given in the question. If information is given that no external funding is done but a new project requires additional funds, then you need to understand that they are using the retained earnings. If they are saying that the new additional funds are raised but in the same proportion as the existing, then the weighted average cost of capital, the weighted marginal cost of capital will be equal to the weighted average cost of capital. And suppose if they are saying that if the additional funds are raised in a different proportion, so you need to accordingly calculate by putting the marginal weights, that is additional weights, to the additional funds raised in order to get the weighted marginal cost of capital. Now, what is the formula for calculating the KO in this case? So it is the formula for calculating the weighted marginal cost of capital. This is 2 and this is 3. So what is the formula for calculating weighted marginal cost of capital? It is marginal weights into the cost of capital. Marginal weights is the additional weights. Okay, and those weights are calculated based, always you know that weights are calculated based on the amount. This marginal weight will be calculated based on the additional amount that the company requires. So for each source by which additional funds are raised, you are going to individually calculate for each source and then add it up, and then you are going to get weighted marginal cost of capital. So we have seen what is weighted average cost of capital. We have seen what is marginal cost of capital. So before going to the problems, just let us revise what is weighted average cost of capital. Specific cost of each source of finance is calculated individually and weight is assigned to each specific cost in the ratio of their share in the total cost. Then the weighted average cost of individual sources arrived and we total the weighted average cost of all the sources to get WACC, that is weighted average cost of capital.